Okay, so we're at the final class in our section on the history of the oral law and its transmission over the generations. And we've spoken at length about the process of how the Torah was given on Mount Sinai to Moshe, and then it was transmitted through the different periods all the way up to the present day. And where we left off last time was the question of, okay, so very nice, we got a nice history lesson for the last three classes. But the question is, now in the year 2014 or 5774, so what am I supposed to do when I have a question? I want to know what Jewish law says about it. I want to know what I'm supposed to do. And I have all these different opinions, so how am I supposed to decide what to do? So we're going to address that a little bit today. Then we're going to speak a little bit about this idea of having different opinions, and then we'll open up the floor for any questions, because it's our last class together. Okay, so the first thing is, what do I do with all these opinions? How am I supposed to possibly figure out what is the law for me today? So if we go a little bit back, 2 classes ago, we spoke about how there were 3 different approaches to dealing with this issue back in the 16th century. Right? The first approach was that of the Beit Yosef, Rabbi Yosef Karo, living in Tzfat, in Israel, and he said, take the 3 most important opinions, and let's make a vote, 2 out of 3, okay, and that will decide what the halacha should be. Okay, that was what the Sephardim did, and that formed the basis of the book known as the Shulchan Aruch, which is the Code of Jewish Law. The second approach was that of Rabbi Moshe Isserles, who lived in Krakow in Poland, right, same time period, and he said, no, we don't take the 3 greatest opinions, because we don't even know what they are, but we follow the Talmudic dictum that you take the most recent opinions, that the later generation is always considered the most closest, the most in touch with what's going on today, and they also had the accessibility to see all the other previous opinions, and therefore we follow what we call the most recent approaches. Okay? But we also thought there was a third approach, and that third approach was very popular with the rabbis, not so much with the laity, and that approach was, there's nothing different today than yesterday. Go read a Gemara, learn what the opinions are, God gave you a brain, and you should use it to figure out what is best for me, what's best for you. Every individual has to use their brain and figure out what they think is the approach which best fits in with the text that we've been given. Okay? So when we look to today, so a lot of that stays true. So therefore, the first person that you should look at for deciding what the halacha should be is yourself. So ideally, we should all, if we have a question, we should open up our Gemaras, right? Learn through the commentaries on the Gemara, all the way up to modern day, and we should be able to figure out for ourselves which opinion makes the most sense in our scenario. Problem number 1 is that not all of us are qualified to do that. Right? Problem number 2, even if you are qualified to do that, maybe you don't have the time to do that. Okay? Again, somebody who's qualified to do this basically has to know all of the Talmud, right? Because you can't just know that one page, because there could be all sorts of places in other Gemaras that you haven't even seen that relate to that. Right? I don't know if I mentioned this story once before, but one of the, I won't mention who it is, but one of the leading Torah scholars of the generation today, so he likes to tell the story that when he was younger, so he learned through one entire tractate on one specific topic, and he decided he wanted to know how well he learned it. So the way he tested himself is he took out a book of questions and answers on the same topic by the undisputed leading Torah scholar of the generation. And what he did is he read the questions, and then he figured out, okay, so I've learned the same material, I'm going to write an answer, and after I've written my answer, let's see what this great rabbi, what his answer was. So he said, he went through, found the question, closed off the answer, wrote down his own answer, went to the next question, same thing, and he found that even though he learned through the entire tractate that deals with his topic, but since that was really all of what he'd learned, again, he'd learned other things, but he hadn't learned the entire Talmud, his answers were radically different than the great sage's answer. Right? The great sage said, in the Gemara that talks about this topic, it says X, Y, Z. But in a different place that you never would have thought to look at unless you've seen it already, it says something else. And in a third place, in a fourth place, he's bringing all these different sources from all over the place, which all are related to here. And if you've only learned a limited section, you're not going to have that breadth in order to give a proper answer which reflects the Gemara's entirety. Okay? Now today, that same young rabbi is now an older rabbi, and he has learned everything. So now he knows his earlier errors and He's very qualified to give, he doesn't need my opinion, but he's very qualified to give answers like that today. So ideally, that's what you do, right? You learn through the Gemara, right? You learn through the sources, and you yourself, right, are the best person for deciding what you feel fits in with the text and what fits in with your scenario and your question that you have right now. But again, at least in this room, none of us are qualified for that. Okay, that's very difficult to do. So we go to the next step, right? So if you can't do something yourself, so what do you do in any field of anything?
Find an expert.
Find an expert. Very good. Okay, so choice number 2 is if you yourself aren't able to do it, so you ask your rabbi. Okay, so a person ideally should have one specific rabbi, okay, to whom they ask their questions, because different rabbis have different approaches and different opinions. Okay, so therefore a person should have a rabbi. Usually that's the rabbi of their synagogue, it could be the rabbi of their yeshiva, could be simply somebody that they've met somewhere, right? But it should be someone who they have a personal connection with. Right? If you ask, right, a lot of people, they like to say, I have a question, let me go to the most famous rabbi in the world and I'm going to ask him my question. The problem is the most famous rabbi in the world might live in Bnei Brak, he might speak 3 words of English, and you're trying to describe to him some social situation that's going on in New York or Philadelphia or LA or Sao Paulo or wherever we're from, right? And he doesn't really get the context, right? Because he's never been in that context. And therefore the problem is that when you're communicating the question, he's hearing a different question than what you're asking. So ideally, you should really have a rabbi who's more of a local, someone who understands you, understands where you're coming from, and can then give you an answer that's really tailored for your specific personality and your specific scenario. Okay, so ideally, a person should have a rabbi. Okay, and again, that has to be a rabbi who's qualified. Okay, not every rabbi is qualified to answer questions in every topic. Okay, so you have to have a rabbi, and you'd ask him your questions. So let's say a person doesn't have a rabbi. You don't have one person that you go to, right? You're the 21st century Jew, and you go for Shachrit, you go to one shul, and Mincha, you go to a different one, and Mariv, you go to a third one, and on Shabbat, you have to choose your own adventure depending on how you're feeling on the week, or depending on who's giving a better talk, right? So you don't have one specific person that you go to, okay? So then what do you do? So then what the next step is, step 3, is what we call the rabbis of the Jewish people, okay? The leading sages of the generation. So even though you may not have a personal connection with that person, okay, and ideally you should go to somebody you do have a personal connection with, the next step is to go to the leaders of the generation, okay, and ask the leaders of the generation, okay, very similar but not the same as the Sanhedrin, right? We used to have a high court, which was the leading scholars, okay, and they would deliberate. So today we don't have a Sanhedrin, we don't have a high court, but we do have leading rabbis. And you ask those leading rabbis, okay, what their opinion is on these specific topics. The difficulty with this is who decides who's a leading rabbi and who's not a leading rabbi, right? My leading rabbi might not be your leading rabbi, right? Depending on what he's wearing or not wearing on his head, right? So how do you decide who's a leading rabbi and who's not a leading rabbi? So that can be very difficult. Okay? There's some people who are universally accepted, but there's other people who it might be a dispute, right, for different reasons. So that also can be difficult. But if that's available, so you look to the leading scholars. Let's say the leading scholars don't discuss it or you don't have access to them, what's the next step? So go through all the opinions that you can find, okay, and go by the majority. Okay, so again, both the Rabbi Yosef Karo and Rabbi Moshe Isserles felt that you should go by the majority. Again, because the Torah tells us that when you have a court, you have a decision to make, then you follow the majority of the judges. Okay, so therefore we treat the opinions as if they're judges, so to say, and therefore we go by the majority of the different opinions. So if you have 30 different opinions and 20 of them say it's permissible and 10 say it's prohibited, so then you go by the majority that this particular thing is permissible. Okay? And let's say you don't have a majority, right? It's equal, or you don't have access to all the opinions, you're not sure how to get to them, you don't understand them all. Okay? So then we have a general rule that if you're really in a doubt, so if the question you're dealing with is a biblical question, okay, it's a question about a law that has biblical ramifications, then you have to always go with the stricter side. Okay? But if you're going with a rabbinical opinion, then you always go with a more lenient side. Okay? So there's a very famous case of 2 leading scholars in North America, right, 2 of the leading rabbis in the last generation, and someone went and said, I don't know what to do, because I asked Rabbi A, Rabbi A says it's permissible, and I asked Rabbi B, and Rabbi B says it's prohibited. So what am I supposed to do? So the first thing is you should probably only go to one of them, right? But he went to both of them already. So he asked one of them, you know, you always say yes, you say yes to this question, and the other one says no. So which one am I supposed to follow? So he said, it's very simple. If we're talking about a biblical mitzvah, so then whichever one of us is strict, you have to go with the one who's strict. But if we're talking about a rabbinic mitzvah, then whichever one of us is lenient, so you should follow the lenient opinion. Okay? So the latter, again, just very quickly, is you yourself should figure out what it is, go through all the opinions. If you're not able to do that, you should have a rabbi that is qualified, that you're able to ask all your questions to. If you don't have a rabbi, then you go to the leading scholars of the Jewish people. Okay? If they're not accessible to you, or if they don't discuss this issue, then you go with the majority of the opinions that are available. And if you are unable to do that, then the last is you're simply in a doubt. If we're talking about a biblical idea, then you would have to be strict. If we're speaking about a rabbinic idea, then you would be lenient. Okay? And that's basically the process that everybody follows today. Okay? So in general, usually people have a rabbi, or people generally belong to a community, you belong to a shul, or you live in a neighborhood where there's a rabbi, right, who's generally leading the community. And therefore, usually we can ask one particular rabbi that question. But if not, we go to the lower down on the list, you go by what the majority says, right? Or if it's biblical, you're strict. If it's rabbinic, then you are lenient. Okay? Now, what about, okay, going back to our friend over here who asked 2 rabbis, right? Am I allowed to shop around, right? I have a certain question, right? And I want to know what the halacha is, but, I'm looking for a certain answer, right? I know what the different opinions are, and I'm not qualified to give an answer myself, but I kind of know where I want it to go. So am I allowed to go, ask a whole bunch of people, and then, okay, well, Rabbi X said I can't do it, Rabbi B said I can, I'm going to go with Rabbi B, right? Am I allowed to arbitrarily do that? So the answer is no. Okay, you can't just, shop around. Now what you can do is you can say Rabbi B seems to be more in line with my way of thinking, right? Although he spent many years learning, and therefore he's much more knowledgeable than I am, but he tends to think generally along the lines that I relate to him better. So I'm going to appoint Rabbi B. He's now my rabbi. Okay, and I can now ask all my questions to Rabbi B. But if Rabbi B turns around and starts telling you all these things that he thinks you should be strict on, you can't just jump ship and go back to Rabbi A. Okay, so you have to be consistent and pick one. Okay, so I have a very good friend, okay, who was a former roommate of mine, and he came to Sukkot, okay, and he went to buy an etrog, right? So if you know a little bit about an etrog, so it's very difficult often to tell if the etrog is kosher, if it's not kosher, if it's considered a very good one or it's not a very good one. So what you do is you buy your etrog, okay, you get a receipt for it, and then you take it around to different rabbis who will examine it for you and tell you whether it's okay, it's not okay. And usually the merchants are very good. If the rabbi says it's not okay, he just signs a paper for you saying, I, Rabbi so-and-so, say that this etrog is no good, and they'll give you a refund and let you exchange it. So a friend of mine went to one rabbi, and he showed him the etrog. And the etrog, he said it was good. It was a nice etrog, he paid the right price, it was very nice, have a nice Sukkot. So at that point, he should have just gone home. But my friend didn't just go home. Instead, he went, as he was walking towards home, he went to the next store where there's another rabbi there who was examining etrogs and said, let me ask him also. So the first mistake was he shouldn't have done that. And now he went in and he entered the second rabbi, he showed him the etrog, and what do you think the second rabbi said? No good. So then he came back and he said, well, I went to Rabbi A and Rabbi A said it was fine. But then I went to Rabbi B and Rabbi B said it wasn't fine. So he wanted to know what to do. So really, Rabbi A's opinion should carry the weight, because he asked Rabbi A the question, and if Rabbi B had known that someone had already ruled on this etrog, he probably wouldn't have said anything. He would have said, someone has already given the opinion, and that's the end of the discussion. The problem is that I asked my friend who Rabbi A was and who Rabbi B was. So Rabbi A had never heard of him before. Rabbi B is one of the leading Torah scholars in the world. So Rabbi A said it was okay, but we don't really know who he is. Rabbi B is a very, very famous, he's passed away since then, but was a very, very famous rabbi who sits on the Beit Din, on the religious court of one of the most famous Beit Dins in the whole world. So he's a very, very famous person. And Rabbi B said it wasn't good, so he wanted to know what to do. So there he's in a dilemma, because he shouldn't have asked the second person, he should have stuck with the first person. But now it's clear that Rabbi B is much more qualified than Rabbi A to answer the question. So in short, he went and got a new one. But you should always, you should know what you're supposed to do and what you're not supposed to do, so that way you can avoid these types of problems. Okay? Any questions on what we do today? You have a question? No? You can call me. You can call me with your questions. I can answer some questions, not all questions. Okay? So I want us to spend a few minutes examining a very famous Gemara, okay, and how it plays in sort of wrapping up a lot of what we were speaking about. Okay? The Gemara in Eruvin, a few other places it's mentioned, describes a dispute between the school of Beit Hillel and the school of Beit Shammai. Right? Hillel and Shammai were some of the leading Torah scholars. Okay, and then they each had their schools. So we had Beit Hillel, right, the house of Hillel, and Beit Shammai, the house of Shammai. And they had different debates back and forth. Hillel and Shammai had debates, and their schools had different debates for a long period of time. And we're trying to figure out what the halacha should follow. So there was a dispute between them, it raged for several years, and then a voice came out from heaven and said the very famous words, Elu ve'elu divrei Elokim chaim, right? Both these opinion and that opinion, both opinions are both the words of the living God. The halacha kibeit Hillel, but the halacha follows this opinion, right? Follows Hillel. Okay, so the first question is, what do you mean? Both opinions are the opinion of the living God, right? First of all, you just told me that the halacha follows this opinion, so that one's got to be wrong. Second of all, how can both opinions be right? Right? If I take a look at this piece of food, I want to know, is this kosher or is it not kosher? It's not sort of kosher and sort of not kosher. You either are allowed to have it for lunch, or you have to, give it to your non-Jewish friend, right? You have to pick. You can't say, well, it's kind of kosher. It's not kind of kosher. It either is or isn't, right? Most things in life are gray, but some things are black and white. Okay, so how can we say no? It's both kosher and not kosher at the same time. Okay, so it's a very famous Gemara, and it's dealt with by the scholars which you mentioned known as the Rishonim, roughly from the 11th to the 15th or 16th century. Okay, and they have different approaches. Okay, so one of the approaches is that if I were to take let's pick this book. Okay, I was to take this book. Okay, what color is this book?
Blue. Black. Black.
Okay, blue or black. Okay, now what color is the book?
Yellow.
Tan, yellowish tan. Okay, so some understand that what the way we have different opinions is simply that there's different perspectives of viewing the same object. So just like with this book, if I view it from the top, it looks blue. If I view it from the edges, it's black. If I view it from the inside, it's yellow. So all of those descriptions are true, but you're only describing a part of the totality of what makes up this book. Okay? So too, when you look at a question in halacha, so it could be it's kosher, could be it's not kosher. Right? From one perspective, it looks like it's kosher. From another perspective, it looks like it's not kosher. Okay? Everything in the whole world is a compound of many different ways you can describe it, many different things, right? That's why the world is made up of of atoms and molecules and everything, to show that everything's made up of little pieces, and there's different ways of looking at things. Okay, so I can look at the same problem, I can look at the same piece of meat, and I can give you, well, according to these reasons it should be kosher, and according to those reasons it should be not kosher. But at the end of the day, I have to decide. So both opinions can be accurately be describing the problem, the scenario, or the object, but at the end of the day, I have to decide which opinion to follow, right? I can't say, well, on the left side it's kosher, on the right side it's not kosher. Right? From this, if you look at it this way, it's kosher. If you look at it that way, it's not kosher. Okay, that's true. But at the end of the day, you have to have a consistent, one-liner. Is it kosher or is it not kosher, right? At the end of the day, we all just want to know, can I eat it for lunch? Right? So I have to be able to answer that question. But that doesn't negate the fact that the non-kosher perspective is still true about a limited aspect of this object. Okay? So that's one opinion. Okay? Another similar approach is that when the Torah was given, okay, the Torah is an infinite, the Torah itself is infinite, right? It's an infinite work, it's an infinite gift of God to mankind. And no one person is able to fully grasp the entirety of the Torah, except maybe for Moshe. And therefore, when we all come out with different perspectives and different opinions, we each see an aspect of the Torah, but because we're limited, because we're human beings, so we're not able to view the entire picture by ourselves. And therefore, only when we bring together the Jewish people, so then can we have a full picture of exactly what's going on. And therefore, I might see this thing as kosher, you might see it as not kosher. Right? Both are true, we're each seeing a partial picture. And that also helps to explain why we follow the majority of opinion. Right? Because if I have a whole bunch of different views of the same object, if the majority see it one way, so we're getting more of the picture of what exactly this object is. And that's one of the reasons that when we have a dispute, we tend to follow the majority, because they have a larger view of this object. Okay? Okay, another approach, okay, as we spoke about earlier, okay, the 13 rules with which we explain the Torah. Okay, this is again following the approach that it's an evolution of the oral law. Okay, and we can have different opinions because as long as I take the Torah text, and as long as I apply these 13 rules appropriately, okay, and I don't just sort of make up what I want to say, but I'm following exactly the instructions that God gave to Moshe how to analyze the Torah text. Anything that I use by definition, because I use the process, that is a truth of the Torah. Right? The Torah was written in such a way that if you use these 13 different rules, you will come up with something that is part of the Torah. And therefore, as long as I kept my methodology, everything I come up with is considered to be Torah. Even though it looks like it's divergent opinions, it's all based on the same root source, and therefore that's what makes it true. Okay? The last point, okay, I want to make is that there is a very important Gemara, which is cited in the Bava Metzia. Okay, we could have a whole class just on this Gemara itself. Okay, and the Gemara describes a dispute between two of the Tanaim, okay, regarding a specific oven, right? The case isn't important for our purposes right now. Okay, about whether this oven was pure, whether it was impure. Okay, and one of the Tanaim says it's pure. One of them says it's impure. So one of them says, if it's true, there should be a miracle, and a miracle happens. And then the other one says, there's a miracle where I think a tree uproots itself and runs across the field and plants itself down. Right? So if any of us were there, we'd say, yeah, go with him. He's good. He made the tree move. Right? Let's go with that. But the other rabbi says, no. Trees don't have a vote in the Beit Din. Right? Tree doesn't count. So then he has another one. I forget exactly what it is, right? But he has another miracle. I think it's whatever it is. And he says, no, we don't take proofs from that either. And the third one is the walls of the Beit Midrash, right? They start falling. He says, if I'm right, the walls should fall down. The walls start falling down. And the other guy says, hey, walls, get out of here. Right? It's not your business. Stay up. So the walls are sort of saying there, we can't go down because he told us not to. We can't go up because the other one told us to go down. So they're sitting there going slanted. Right? And then a voice comes out from heaven. Right? So if the tree and the other miracle and the walls aren't enough for you, a voice comes out from heaven and says, that rabbi's right. And we would all say, okay, we may not believe trees, but usually if there's a voice from heaven telling us what to do, so either we're crazy, and even if we are crazy, we're going to follow it anyways. Right? So the voice comes out and says, Rabbi, this rabbi's right. And the other rabbi says, hey, you don't have a vote either. So obviously that presents a bit of a question. Right? What do you mean you don't have a vote either? Shouldn't that be the supreme vote? Right? We're all arguing back and forth. What does God want from us? And he sends a direct email to all of our accounts. Signed by God, this is what you should be doing today. And we say, no, we don't listen to you. Right? It sounds like we should, take this guy out and stone him or something. So no. And why is that? Because the Torah tells us a very important principle, which we call lo bashamayim hi. Right? The Torah originally was in heaven, and then the Torah was brought down into this world. It was given by God to mankind. And along with just the rules of the Torah itself is the methodology for understanding the Torah, the methodology for deciding what the Jewish law should say at the end of the day. And that methodology says that you go by the majority. The Torah scholars use these 13 tools to derive the halacha, and we follow the majority. And the halacha is decided in this world. And therefore, even if God comes down and tells us this is what the halacha should be, the halacha that we follow is the halacha of the Torah, and the Torah tells us we follow what the majority of our sages tell us to do. Okay? And the Gemara continues and says, what was God's reaction when they told God, your opinion doesn't count? So we would have imagined, God gets pretty angry. He says, what's with these Jewish people? So no, the Gemara says no, God was laughing. And God said, my children have beaten me, my children are beating me, and he went on laughing. Okay, so you see that God approved of what the sages were doing. Okay? So you see the halacha is decided here, and that's really our mission. Right? Our mission is that we have to use our heads, we have to figure out what the halacha wants from us, we have to follow the methodology that's given by the Torah on how we should decide the Jewish law, we have to ask our rabbis, we have to ask the leading sages, we have to follow the majority, follow the rules, and as long as we keep with that methodology, then we're following what Hashem wants for us, and we're doing the best that we can do in order to fulfill His will and fulfill the will of the Torah. Are there any questions? We've got 8 minutes. We can talk about anything else.
If we're going to study tomorrow, start getting into the Mishnah tomorrow, even if I get a book that is the English translation of the Mishnah, it's still a isolated learning environment back home. I don't have the one-on-one session with the Bruce says we have here. What is a good avenue? I mean, I know I could always just go ask my rabbi, but, you know, I can't
What if you
just,
don't have a rabbi?
right, I can't just easily just like wake up in the morning and then go down to breakfast and say, hey, Rabbi, because, you know, he's not there at all.
You're saying for a learning schedule, or saying for if you have a question that comes up?
Yeah, for questions or even for a learning environment. They're,
So they're different. Because if you have a question, often you can just call someone. I know in Israel there's a very well-known rabbi here. You can text him. He'll text you back within a half hour.
oh, wow.
Right?
Okay.
So I don't know if they have that in America. I'm sure somebody has that. But you just send him a text message, what your question is, and then he'll, as long as it's a simple enough question, and then he'll text you back an answer.
Is there some kind of video environment, or will there be some kind of video environment for the weekly?
So absolutely. So there's a few things you can do. First of all, you can, as you said yourself, right? You can ask your local rabbi if he has time, if he knows someone in the community who has time. But there's another institution called Partners in Torah, okay, which is designed exactly for this, right? That they match up somebody who has a limited learning background with someone who has a more extensive learning background, and they basically set up their schedule as to what's convenient for them. So once a week, twice a week, a half hour a week, an hour a week, whatever it is, and they choose, you know, whatever topic you want, and you get your own chavrusa, right? And you can learn in person, you can learn over the phone, you can learn over Skype, whichever way you want, and they set that up for you. So it's called Partners in Torah. I have a whole bunch of friends who actually work for them, and they can get you in touch with that.
Okay.
Alternatively, you can actually set up here with the yeshiva, so we do offer that you can set that up as well, that you can just email the office and say, I'm looking for a chavrusa. Again, here we have to contend with the time difference, so it might be easier to do it, you know, with someone who's more local. We do have ongoing, some of the rabbis learn one-on-one over Skype with some of the alumni or students or people who have been on different trips and stuff, so we can set that up here as well. I think your best bet's probably these Partners in Torah, and I'd be happy to get you in touch with them. I don't know anyone in Philly who does it, but I'm sure they have a big setup over there. They have it in, I mean, first of all, even if someone's not in Philly, you can, you know, you can Skype them no matter where they are. Definitely something that can be set up, and from what I've seen, it works very well, because it's, you know, you learn what you want when you want. It works for your schedule. And you can always change, meaning you're not set into an environment. So if you want, you know, if you want to do, you know, Thursdays at 9 p.m., but this Thursday you have a meeting, so you can't make it. So you can say, like, you know, this week I can't do, can we do Wednesday? And you can work it around. Again, you should try to keep, there's a very big, you know, merit to having a set time that you don't move, but sometimes it doesn't always work, and it makes it customizable.
And just remember, if you do try and set up with Chappelle's, that you can only do it between 5 and 7 a.m., 8:15 to 9 a.m., 2:40, or 7:20 to 8.
There you go.
Right?
There you go. Craig's got it. Any other questions? Craig, you had a question?
Do the rabbi things only from Torah or from the Ketuvim also?
Doing Ketuvim also, right? All of the Tanakh, right? Primarily from just the Torah, but from all three works as well. Yeah. Good question. No? Yeah.
Would you recommend a certain hierarchy of skills before you delve into Gemara? Should you have basic competency in Chumash? Should you be familiar with, the whole Tanakh before you,
Okay, good question. So the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot gives you a whole curriculum on how to study. So it says first you learn all of Tanakh, then you learn all the Mishnah, and then you learn all the Gemara. Right? And the Gemara itself discusses this issue. How should you divide up? Right? We all have, right? Even if you learn full time, there's still only 24 hours in a day. Right? You got to eat and sleep and other things you have to do. Right? So how do you balance that? Right? How are you supposed to work out your schedule? So the Gemara says that you should divide up into threes. Right? Your learning. Right? But Tosfot over there has a very interesting comment. Right? And Tosfot says over there that if you learn Gemara, so Gemara includes everything within it. Because when you learn Gemara, we have Torah verses. And again, this is if you learn Gemara properly. Right? If you learn Gemara properly means I learn through Gemara, and then I have a verse. I have my verse. So what do? We say, okay, we have a verse. That's nice. Read those 2 words and keep going. What you really should do is you should open up, right? And again, these newer Gemaras sort of cheat for us. You don't have to do it at all. But in the older Gemaras that don't have the verse right next to it, you just have 2 words and a citation. So open up your Tanakh and read the chapter, or at least the paragraph, that verse is from. And then you get the whole context of it. So as you're learning through the Gemara, you're also learning through Tanakh. You're also learning through Mishnah, because again, the Gemara is based on the Mishnah. So Tosfos says that if you learn Gemara, as long as you learn it properly by delving into all the cited sources, so in that way you're learning through all the material at the same time. So by learning Gemara, you can go through, you really can go through everything as long as you do it that way. But I don't think you need a prerequisite. You have to learn through all of Tanakh first. It'd definitely be nice, right? But I don't think you have to do it. But certainly something like Tanakh, if you want to do it quickly, so just read it in English. Right? I did that many years ago. Right? You read it in English. I did it, I don't know if you have the time for this, but I did a book a day. Right? So you read, for Joshua, Sunday. Monday, Judges. Tuesday, Samuel 1. Wednesday, Samuel 2. Right? Kings 1, Kings 2. By Shabbat, I've already read half of Tanakh. Right? So okay, I was on vacation, so I had time. But it's good just to read through so you have a general overview of what's going on, and you can read it in English. Right? Because even if you're fluent in Hebrew, the Hebrew is difficult. But that way, just to get an overview, if you want, to go through, see exactly who's who, what's going on, what are the things that are mentioned. But it's definitely not a prerequisite. You can definitely open a Gemara before doing that. But it definitely helps. Okay? Okay.